My active addiction led to me hurting someone who loved me and who I loved. I was living this double life where I was somebody on the outside, and then behind closed doors, I just had this weight on my shoulders and this shame that continued to thrive in secrecy. I got into a relationship with a woman, and through my sexual compulsions and my dishonesty and shame, I was not faithful to her for many, many months. She ended up finding out about it. It led to a very, very painful breakup. Maybe I'm just gonna be that guy who's in his 40s and 50s and 60s and still in the throes of active addiction, just acting out his life away. If you had told me 6 months ago, a year ago, that I would be able to go without watching porn for over 3 months, I would have thought you were crazy. I would have never believed that I was capable of something like that. To look at it now, it just feels incredible. What seems like an insolvable problem definitely has a solution. All it takes is that first step. There are so many men who could benefit from this, and I think the most important thing that I learned was...
All right, everybody, welcome. This is Aaron. Aaron has been in the program here for a couple months now and has a really interesting story that I really want to capture because he entered his recovery journey during a period of time when most people feel like recovering would have been impossible. So we'd love to dive into the story here a little bit and figure out like what was going on and ultimately how Aaron got to where he is. So to kick things off, could you tell us who you are and how long you've been in orbital recovery?
Yeah, so I've been in orbital recovery now for a few months. I joined the program while I was still in a relationship, no longer in a relationship, and we'll get into why and how my active addiction led to me hurting someone who loved me and who I loved.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue. So where did your journey with pornography begin, your struggle with it begin, and how long has that been going on?
Wow, I mean, it's been going on for a long time, meaning I was first exposed to it like most men around the age of maybe 10 or 11, a time in a person's life when they should be outside, playing basketball with their friends in their local rec center. I was exposed to an industry that would lead to a decade plus of active addiction and would take so much from me. And I didn't even know it at the time because it felt so enticing. It felt like my problems would just be forgotten and would melt away as soon as I got on the computer to do this thing. It continued for most of my adolescence, my college years, my young adult years. I didn't know that it was affecting me in any negative way until I turned maybe 23 or 24. I read numerous articles. I read a book called Your Brain on Porn. But, being cognizant of a problem and actually solving it are two very different things. I understood that this was something that was affecting my life negatively, but I had no understanding of the true depth of addictive behavior. I had no understanding of where this compulsion stemmed from. I had no understanding of how to resolve it. I didn't even know that there were communities out there that helped people out with this sort of thing. I always thought that porn addiction was something that's almost cartoonish in a way, like funny, because how could you be addicted to watching people have sex on the internet? It doesn't seem like something that felt as real as alcoholism or drug addiction or something of that nature. So as time went on, I tried in vain to sort of white knuckle my way into sobriety, like I think a lot of people tend to do. Reading back on a lot of my journal entries from that point in my life, I almost tried to shame myself into recovery, which is about as big a recipe for disaster as you can imagine. Every journal entry was some permutation of, why are you so bad at this? Why can't you just stop this? Or some permutation of, next time I'll be better. And next time I'm not going to do this. Next time, this, and that, only to come back a day or two later and relapse again. I would not say that I had healthy, communicative, open vulnerable relationships with women at this time in my life. I had girlfriends during my adolescence and my college years and my young adult years, but they weren't at the level of depth and vulnerability that I saw most other people have. And I felt like there was always something holding me back from being my true self in these contexts, and particularly in relations with women. More recently, I got into a relationship with a woman, and through my sexual compulsions and my dishonesty and shame around it, I was not faithful to her for many, many months during our relationship, and she ended up finding out about it, and it led to a very, very painful breakup, but also an inflection point in my life where I felt like I had to do something about this, or else I'm just going to be that guy who's in his 40s and 50s and 60s and still lusting after women, or still in the throes of active addiction, just acting out his life away. And that's what led me to Orbital.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The explanation of your story. And I'm curious, are you open to diving a little bit more into the breakup? If I ask you a couple more questions on that, as I think this is an area where most guys operate with this assumption, and part of it is entrained by addiction itself because it makes us apathetic. We get numb. But we have this idea that that would never be me. So I'm curious, kind of stepping through some of the stuff that you mentioned, did you ever expect, or did you ever think that eventually you would become the man where your compulsions took you from pornography actually out off of the internet and into the real world, to being somebody who was unfaithful to a girl that you were committed to? Did you ever expect that your addiction would take you there?
No, I didn't. And this ties into something that you told me a long time ago, that sexual compulsion rarely exists in a vacuum. And I think that statement really helped hammer home exactly how I felt at the time and how I still feel, that what we consider to be a porn addiction very often doesn't just stop at the computer screen. It's something that manifests in other areas of life. And I didn't truly understand that until that happened.
Yeah, it's like an octopus that has tentacles that reach throughout different facets of our life. And we experience, I talk about a lot, that pornography tends to be just the primary manifestation. But when we look a little bit deeper, we see, oh, there's a lot of other areas in my life where this same kind of thing is showing up. So I'm curious too with, the relationship aspect. Again, because there's a lot of guys out there, I know some might be listening to this right now, who don't ever think that pornography would be the reason why a relationship would end. They are probably thinking like, oh, I could quit if I wanted to. Or if they're single, they're probably thinking, if I get into a relationship, the pornography will go away. What would you say to guys who have that kind of mindset, thinking that this problem could easily be solved and B, would go away completely if they got into a relationship?
I would say that has been the true opposite of my experience. I think it trivializes the addiction to say that just because you'll have a girl who is, presumably meeting your sexual needs in a committed relationship, that it would absolve you of all of this other stuff that you haven't dealt with from your childhood or your adolescence. I feel that there was no relationship with a woman or any women that would have helped me not be a porn addict. The only thing that has helped me is community, connection, and the understanding that the program has given me.
What shift in understanding do you feel like joining Orbital, obviously connecting with me, helped you to make? What I heard from right there just now was sort of like you realized in a very inarguable way that pornography addiction is not a sex deficiency disorder. So what did you realize that it is that opened the doorway for you to now find freedom?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I learned was that this is a disorder that stems from shame and from a lack of connection and a lack of spiritual enlightenment in other areas of life. For example, it's very rare that sexual desire would lead me to acting out. It was almost always some form of boredom or anxiety or rejection or some negative emotion that I felt I had to numb with this agent. It was never just quote unquote being horny as some people might think that it is, right? Understanding that porn wasn't my problem, it was the solution to my problems, was the most insightful thing that I gained from even that early period of being in orbital. That helped me understand that there was so much more underneath the iceberg than what I was interpreting it to be. Resolving that takes a lot more energy and effort and connection than just thinking that it's some form of sexual urge that is leading me to this behavior. There was a whole lifetime of traumas and lack of self-compassion and disconnection that was leading me to this behavior that I needed to address.
Fast forward to today now, what did your recovery journey look like after getting into the program up until today?
In the early stages of the program, I'll be honest, it felt strange. It felt strange to be in a community where this sort of thing that I had hidden from my entire life was being discussed so openly. And I struggled to connect with it at first. And I ended up falling back into old patterns of relapse and acting out. In fact, with like this almost renewed shame of, oh, you're in this program now, you're in this community, and you're still doing XYZ. It wasn't until the breakup itself and the immediate aftermath that I was sort of forced to stand in the wreckage of my own decisions and that I fully embraced the core concepts of Orbital, like checking in daily, making recovery calls daily, going to the recovery workshops that are part of Orbital, doing the school modules, filling my life with outer circle activities like exercise or sports or socialization, that I felt the addiction start to lose its grasp over me, right? I'm only a little over 3 months sober right now, and I don't think that 50 plus years of active addiction can just be eliminated in 3 months, but those actions are what directly led to this long stretch of sobriety that I'm in right now.
And it's often the case, right, that our addiction will beat us into a position of agreeability. We will try over and over and over again until the ground underneath us is falling away and we have one tiny little toehold of trying to be like, there's still some way that I can do this on my own. And then something will happen where eventually that breaks and surrender happens. And then through that doorway, we oftentimes find the willingness, right, to do the things that are necessary. And then on the other side of that, we're like, man, why have I been avoiding doing this for so long? Like, this is helpful. My life is getting better. I'm actually finding freedom. What I was fighting for was my own slavery. I was fighting for a miserable life, disconnected and insisting that I had to go it alone. And then once I get out of that, all of a sudden, I kind of turn inside out. Like my whole life starts to look different. I'm showing up differently. My life is actually producing different results. I do want to emphasize on one thing, right? Which is now being over 3 months sober is such a massive, massive achievement. Giving testament to the fact, like I said, that your life is now actually producing a different outcome, which tells us that the system that is you has fundamentally changed in some very important way because you're producing a different output. I'm curious to like put some numbers to it. Previous to getting into the program, how frequently were you engaging and watching pornography? Maybe on like a weekly basis on average?
On average, I would say multiple times a week. There were some times when by sheer force of will, I could go a week without it, but it never felt good. I would almost be more excited to go back after that week because I felt that my tolerance for the content had gone down a little bit. And I just knew that next hit was going to be way better than the last one because I managed to scrounge together a few days where I didn't do it. But on average, it was a multiple time a week experience would ramp up significantly if I was under any sort of stress or anxiety. Yeah, multiple hours a week that I would devote to this.
Yeah. And for how many years was that pattern happening?
10, 15 years maybe.
Yeah. So again, from a bird's eye view, I really just want to emphasize this. 15 years of not being able to go more than a week. You get into orbital. Of course, your early journey up until that breakup, right? That first like 3 weeks or so, there were some challenges. Now you're standing at 3 months free. Looking back at the change that has happened, how does that sit with you?
It feels great. It feels, almost unbelievable in many ways. If you had told me 6 months ago, a year ago, or even, 5 years ago that I would be able to go without watching porn for over 3 months, even 3 weeks rather, I I would have thought you were crazy. I would have never believed that I was capable of something like that. To look at it now, it just feels incredible.
And there's something about your journey in particular that I really wanted to emphasize as well is you got sober. You have started your journey of recovery and achieved a really significant milestone of sobriety while going through one of the most painful things that's ever happened to you. A good percentage of guys, right, they don't really admit they have a problem and are willing to get help until they run into a brick wall of like a relationship ending and betrayal trauma and like all this stuff. Other guys, they know it's a problem, then they get into recovery and things tend to like just get better. But then something bad happens, something painful happens, and then the real work begins. But you started your journey in the depths of difficulty and pain and grief and sadness and the loss of a relationship and all of that. And so I'm curious to dive a little bit more into that aspect. What is it that you got inside of Orbital that you feel like shifted you out of this sense of feeling like you had to escape or numb out the pain that you were going through? How did Orbital support you through this?
That's a great question. I think fundamentally there was this reckoning with the consequences of my actions that began to integrate the shadow that I felt was inside me, right? I felt that for most of my life, I was living this double life where I was somebody on the outside, and then behind closed doors, I just had this weight on my shoulders and this shame that continued to thrive in secrecy. And I foolishly believed that those two lives would never intersect. Like Peter Parker and Spider-Man are never going to meet each other. They're completely two separate entities, but in reality, they aren't, right? They do intersect in some form. In Orbital is where I got to understand the shadow more, and I got to shine some light on the shame that was continuing to thrive and to multiply in this petri dish of secrecy. And that comes from being around a community of other men who are non-judgmental and who have suffered from a lot of the same things that I was suffering from. I found it incredibly difficult at first to open up, but the more that I opened up, the more that I checked in, the more that I got to know other members and learn about their stories, the less heavy it felt in my own heart that I had done these things, and the less weight I felt on my own shoulders. It got to the point where it just felt so much better to check something in or to talk about something on a call than to betray my recovery journey by acting out. That's not to say that the urges are just going to go away. You could read through my last 3 months of check-ins. There's been plenty of times when I've been up against the gun, but having these tools and this community as an outlet for these feelings instead of feeling the need to numb them has been a monumental shift in my life.
Yeah, forming the basis of what we call co-regulation, right? The ability to process emotion inside of community with people who understand our problem because they've struggled with it themselves. It's life-changing. I mean, it certainly was for me. And that's part of the reason, of course, why it's a foundation of what we do. Yeah, I'm curious, over the period of time, right? Of course, inevitably, with any journey of recovery, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? It is challenging. You will face urges again. I tell you that literally on your guys' onboarding call. I tell you, there is going to come a day when watching pornography once again sounds like a good idea. And so we plan for that, right, in the hopes of making it through those moments to stay sober, which you have over the course of the last 3 months, which has been fantastic. Given the period of sobriety that you found now and the improvements that you've experienced, how has this transformation affected other areas of your life?
The first thing to think about is the amount of time that I would spend on it that is no longer being spent watching porn. I mean, we're talking hours and hours a week that has just been added back into my schedule that I can use for literally anything else. That's been huge. The communication skills and the vulnerability that I've been able to practice within the calls has been really enlightening to me. And I felt that it's really enhanced my relationships with other men in my life, other women too, like friends and family members, but particularly I feel like I've been able to talk about certain things with male friends that I maybe would not have been open about in the past. And that's unlocked a new level of depth in my male friendships that's been really exciting to explore.
You hear me say this all the time in the program too. There's so many things that are so much more important than just a streak in a number of days. And many of the things most worth having in life and most worth achieving in recovery are hard to quantify, like the depth of my relationships or my capacity for intimacy and connection. Yet those are the foundation of a life well lived. The quality of the connection that we experience with others is the foundation of our life in so many ways. So I appreciate you speaking to that. Where do you think you would be today without Orbital had you not joined the program?
I mean, probably still in the throes of addiction, probably still acting out, probably still living the same duplicitous existence that I lived a year ago, probably still being content with surface level relationships, both friendships and with women. If I was still in a relationship, probably still engaging in some form of infidelity.
And knowing the difference between where you would have been versus where you are now, if you could go back in time, maybe speak to a version of yourself who was maybe on the fence about joining, or somebody listening to this who's on the fence about getting plugged in and actually getting professional help to get this problem solved, what would you say to that person?
I would say that there's so much depth in your life to unlock that you're just leaving on the table by not making the leap. I would say I can understand why something like this would be scary, and it often is scary to be vulnerable on a level that at least I had never been vulnerable before in my life. But the amount of depth that I've been able to unlock within myself and the excitement that I have for my future in recovery is just monumental. And I think what seems like an insolvable problem definitely has a solution. There are so many men who could benefit from something like this. And I think all it takes is that first step to absolve yourself of this weight that's been probably weighing you down for the majority of your adult life.
Do you feel like you've gotten a positive return on the investment that you made?
Oh yeah. Yeah, 100 times over. That's that's an easy question to answer.
Lastly, but not least, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with anybody who is listening regarding recovery, your experience in the program, or sort of final parting words of wisdom?
There's something that you said in one of the recovery calls that resonated with me. I think you said we aren't bad people trying to become good. We are sick people trying to heal. And I think the porn industry is so hell bent on keeping us addicted to this loop of dopamine that it can be hard to break out of, and it can facilitate a lot of shame in a lot of men. I would want people to know that having this problem does not mean that you are inherently defective in any way. It just means that you were exposed to something that has had a major negative influence in your life that's been designed to keep you in an active addiction, because that's what their profit margins are dependent on. It's dependent on your shame and your sadness and your loneliness fueling their money. I would just say that shame thrives in secrecy, and the way to reduce the hold that shame has in your life is to illuminate it. And that's done through community and through connection.
That was beautiful, man. Very well said. I appreciate that. So from here, can go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank you for your time, for joining the program, for taking a risk and jumping in. Thank you for trusting me. And I'm very excited to get to continue to walk by your side on this journey of recovery and see where we're going to be in a couple months' time. It's very exciting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate.